Okay, so, my friend Ryan, who I went to high school with, I just hooked him and a couple other friends up with our doctor. And he set my friend up with methylphenidate and some other shit. But I don't know why I'm telling you that. That is a retarded preamble.
Charge up your axons, ready your receptors, and shift your lobes into upper beta phase. You are listening to Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast dedicated to helping you optimize your brain with the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience, nootropics, and psychopharmacology.
Hello and welcome to Smart Drug Smarts. I am your host, Jesse Lawler, excited to bring you the 88th episode. In this podcast dedicated to the ongoing improvement of your own brain by any and all means at your disposal. This week I have at my disposal 2 methylphenidate capsules. Methylphenidate is the scientific name for the chemical better known as Ritalin, a drug widely prescribed for ADHD. We had a Ritalin episode, number 69 of Smart Drug Smarts. So if you want to go back to the vault and listen in on that one to kind of brush up on this chemical, that wouldn't be a terrible idea. But this episode is going to be a self-experiment. We're not going to make any presumptions that this is real science. This is sort of a single-person anecdotal thing that we'll be doing here. But I'd never taken Ritalin before. I'd been curious about it. I have a friend who has a prescription, and I managed to get a couple of pills that I've been carting around for a couple of months. Hadn't taken them yet, and this seemed like the week to do it. So my experience with my first ever time using Ritalin will be the main meat of this episode. If you hang around until the very end, I'm going to tell you about the latest and probably weirdest discovery that science has made into the multiplicity of individual evolutions of an eye. An eye has evolved on a bunch of different branches of the tree of life, but this one is really, really bizarre. That'll be coming up in the Ruthless Listener Retention gimmick, but as usual, let's kick things off with This Week in Neuroscience.
Smart Drug Smarts, This Week in Neuroscience.
So we've had no small number of episodes on the benefits of sleep. But a new study from the University of California at Berkeley has shown very specifically one place where a lack of sleep can really come back to bite you, and that is in the correct interpretation of emotions in other people, the people that you're interacting with. In this recent study, researchers conducted heart and brain scans of 18 young adults while they viewed 70 different computer-generated faces with facial expressions ranging from friendly to neutral to threatening. Participants viewed the same faces on a couple separate occasions, once after they'd had a full night's sleep and another time after pulling an all-nighter. fMRI brain scans showed that while the individuals were sleep-deprived, they did a much worse job distinguishing between friendly and threatening faces, said Dr. Matthew Walker, a professor of psychology and neuroscience. This is especially concerning considering that almost 2/3 of people in developed nations fail to get sufficient sleep. Walker and his colleagues previously showed that sleep loss is implicated in many forms of mental illness. Among other things, sleep loss overactivates the amygdala, part of the brain that helps with processing emotions, and fails to operate as well in mental illnesses such as depression and anxiety. The silver lining to all this, and if you have to get one type of sleep to maintain your emotional intelligence, the one that you want to aim for is REM, rapid eye movement sleep, the sleep that takes place when we dream. REM sleep was positively correlated with subjects' ability to accurately read facial emotions, suggesting that dreams play an important role in the maintenance of our emotional intelligence. So once again, a ton of interaction this week with the Smart Drug Smarts listenership. Thank you so much to everybody who's been reaching out. Going to go back to the grab bag for a couple of 5-star reviews that have come in recently on iTunes for the podcast. DS New Day Rising says, I proudly tell people about the podcast and look forward to new episodes every week. Shlomo Papakjadan, jeez, that's a tough one to pronounce. Shlomo Papakjadan says, great show, just don't forget to use your own common sense and take everything with a grain of salt, since even the best doctors and scientists only know what they know today, and often what they know tomorrow is the complete opposite. Hopefully not the complete opposite. Hopefully we're zeroing in towards the truth, but I think that note of caution is well warranted. Marcharm particularly recommends the Rhodiola rosea episode with Dr. Patricia Gerbarg, and Greg778 at Live says, very good information. I think I'll end up listening to all of the podcasts. So thanks to all of you that took the time to leave those reviews. It really helps. iTunes rankings are the way that a lot of people find the podcast, so these fresh, reasoned, and positive reviews really, really help the show. I also got a bunch of listener emails this week, including one that I will excerpt a snippet of here from a listener who bought a combo pack of Nexus and Mitogen, the 2 supplement stacks that we just released under the Axon Labs brand name. He says, the Nexus and Mitogen combo stacks up against Provigil pretty damn well. Provigil being the trade name for modafinil. I'm dosing 2 Nexus in the morning before food with coffee, and 1 Nexus and 2 Mitogen approximately 2 o'clock, sometimes with food, sometimes not. I was taking 1 more Nexus before bed, but found that my sleep was not quite as good. Like I would wake up perfectly rested at 2:30 a.m. and then not get back to sleep. But I find myself really looking forward to that 2 o'clock hit. not like a junkie jonesing for it, but more ready to switch back on again. So thank you very, very much for that feedback. Of course, it's awesome to get unsolicited testimonials from people, hearing that they're having good reactions on those products. The website for both Nexus and Mitogen is axonlabs.io. And of course, if you go to smartdrugsmarts.com, you will find a link over there as well. And yeah, just in case you're wondering, I definitely washed everything out of my system. I didn't do anything the day before doing the methylphenidate experiment, just because I didn't want to bias the result or color my findings or anything like that. If you're a few episodes behind on Smart Drug Smarts, or this is your first episode, one great way to keep up on everything that we're doing is signing up for our mailing list, which you can find very easily at smartdrugsmarts.com, or sign up over the phone by texting SDS to the phone number 33733. That'll work if you are on a mobile phone in the US. Quick follow-up from last week's episode, where Dr. Robert Reiner talked about something called paced breathing and how it could be used to control stress responses. He described a process on how to identify the proper pace of breathing that would be most effective for any given person, and apparently there is an app for this on the Google Play Store for Android. It's called, you guessed it, paced breathing. So we'll also put a link to that in the show notes. So with no further ado, let's jump in to the self-experiment part of the episode.
Smart Drug Smarts.
Okay, so we're about to jump into this somewhat herky-jerky documentary / dramatic reenactment / interjection from various sources. So we're kind of going to get a cross-section of my experience with methylphenidate, some other user experiences, and commentary from a few experts. By the way, for reference, the single pill that I took was a 27.5 milligram pill, a sustained release pill over the course of a day. So if you're curious about mapping the effects that I felt to a particular dosage, that's the dosage. So I must admit, going into this, I had the combination of excitement for trying something new and also a little bit of trepidation because there's some things you can never do again for the first time. And the example I always give for this is like music albums. Like if you find a band that you really like, but then they're a band that's no longer active, you discover a couple other albums and you really get into it, at some point you always get to the point where you get to like the last album from that band that you haven't heard yet, and you know that band is defunct, they're not making any more music, maybe they're all dead, whatever. And so at least if you're me, it's like you have the album and you're kind of looking at it and wondering, like, should I listen to it? Or should I save it for some rainy day or some period of celebration or something like that to listen to it then? Because you're never, ever, ever going to hear new music from this band that you like again. And that thought process is always sort of something I go through when I'm excited about a first-time experience. Because some things don't really stand up so well on the second time. I know there's a lot of people out there that like skydiving, but for me, skydiving was one of those things. Like the first skydiving experience was just absolutely amazing. And then I did it a second time and a third time, I think like 6 months later and then maybe 2 years later. And the luster was gone. It was like, falling out of a plane. The ground's coming up. There it is. And it was shocking how much of an anticlimax it was after you'd done it once. So anyway, maybe that explains why I had these methylphenidate pills. I've had 2 of them sitting around for a couple of months at least now and considered taking them on various days, but hadn't gotten to it until this week's episode came up and figured now was as good a time as any. So when I decided I was going to do this episode, I told my friend who had provided me with these pills, he actually has a prescription, that I was going to be doing this. And he's like, oh, well, let's jump on a call because I want to tell you exactly how to go about doing it. He has sort of this protocol that he's come up with. He sounded very excited about it. And so, of course, I wanted to jump on the phone and hear what he had to say. And I recorded the phone call because I wanted to take some notes in case he was going to be talking faster than I could be typing notes. I didn't know how complicated the protocol was going to be, but then he pointed out, and I told him I was going to be recording the call, but he said, well, don't put this on the podcast. I don't want this to become known that I'm a prescribed user of this stuff. And I said, yeah, no problem. So we scrubbed his voice, but what you're going to hear is a reenactment of that phone call with me speaking to our friend, Mr. Speak and Spell.
Hello, I am Mr. Speak and Spell.
So here we go with the dramatic reenactment of my conversation from like a day and a half before I actually did this experiment.
The truth of it is, the absolute best fucking results that I have, I shit you not, man. Because it's slow release. The ones I gave you are slow release. A lot of them aren't. You take it and it gives you get like crazy hyped up and then you rapidly taper. Or you definitely feel the peak. This stuff is time release, so it doesn't crescendo all in one big hit and then drop you down. So what I do is, I get up in the morning and drink, and this is very specific that I found this really work. Drink a liter of like, hot or room temperature water, as soon as you get out of bed. And I mean look, this is what I do, and this is a little gross but I'm gonna tell you anyway.
Sure.
Drink, I shit you not, a liter of hot or warm water, so you have like a massive poop.
Right.
And then, eat the methylphenidate while drinking a cup of coffee on an empty stomach. okay? And then don't eat anything for like at least an hour.
Okay, so we are about 5 minutes into this methylphenidate experiment. It's 8:36 in the morning. I had the pill at 8:31, washed it down with a half a cup of hot tea, and not surprisingly, no effects yet, but we'll see what happens. I'll be continuing to check in throughout the day. I'm going to be traveling around in different places, so I can't promise a nice audio background all the time. You're probably going to be hearing some bumping and banging and car horns and fleeing refugees and coffee grinders and things like that. But yeah, we'll chart my progress throughout the day and see how this stuff does. Okay, so it's now just under 45 minutes after I took the pill. Definitely started feeling something around maybe 20 to 25 minutes in. It's interesting. I could actually kind of physically feel something in my head. It kind of felt like my sinuses opened up a bit, a little bit of a popping in my ears, that kind of thing. Definitely feel alert, sharp. Again, I had the methylphenidate with tea, which didn't have a heck of a lot of caffeine, and I haven't had any coffee yet today, although I have been advised to go ahead and drink coffee, and to not drink coffee would actually be so counter to my usual day that it would probably be somewhat invalidating this single day experiment to not have at least some decent amount of coffee in my system. But yeah, feeling good so far. Been getting organized for the workday and about to dive into the real work now. It is about 9:15 in the morning. Okay, so now this is Jesse from the future again, but I took a couple of notes as to the goings-on during the day. So about 9:20, just 5 minutes after that last segment, I felt the need to take a second trip to the bathroom. So I did. I mention this only because it was something that was deemed such an important part of my friend's methylphenidate protocol.
The key is, I don't know what it is about going, like taking a dump and get everything out of your intestinal tract like in the morning, but doing that, drinking like a cup of tea or coffee, you know, whatever caffeine beverage you want, and then wait like an hour before you eat anything so it really starts to absorb before you put anything on top of it, and then keep your sugar intake really low, but don't forget to eat. Definitely like take in protein, take in some carbs, and stay hydrated all day. I'm not kidding, man. You'll be sharp as a goddamn tack for like 15 hours.
Wow, man, that is like a ringing endorsement.
That combination, it is the way to get it done.
Question, you said hot water, room temperature water, or what is it?
Well, just not cold water. Like drink, I've got a big liter jar and I really like filter the water, and then heat it up in the microwave for just a little bit. It doesn't have to be hot, but cool enough that you could really take big gulps.
Gotcha.
There's something about this. This is part of the master cleanse too, where they put salt in it.
Yeah, the salt sort of forces it out of your body, makes your body fire hose it out, because it has like the same salt content as your bloodstream, and so your body...
Yeah, you know you don't need it like that. You don't need to be fire hosing. But you do. What the goal is to poop. Like, just get shit out of your system because then methylphenidate's not competing with anything else. And what I've noticed is that just setting it up, and getting it in your system before you put anything else on top of it and giving a chance to take hold it, makes it 100 times more effective.
And then at 9:53, so about half an hour after that, I settled down to work at a coffee shop and drank a large coffee with some heavy cream. So not half and half with any sugars, just the straight fattiness of heavy cream. And I'd had just a little tiny bit of coconut oil earlier because methylphenidate is said to be highly lipid soluble. So I figured having just a little bit of fat in my stomach would help it absorb better. So my next recorded follow-up was in a couple hours after that point, but first let's jump into a little micro interview I did with a friend of a friend who is an occasional methylphenidate user. Just wanted to sprinkle in some people's opinions other than my own.
I think what's interesting about Ritalin for me, and I am on it obviously legally, but I know a lot of people who aren't. And there is a difference. You know, there's still a lot of stigma attached to conditions, especially things like ADHD. To a lot of people, it's almost a silly condition, if that makes sense. And these medications can actually do wonders for people. You know, people like me who I've got like 19 projects going on at once. And then suddenly you get on the right track with something and you start having this tiny little pill and this tiny little thing and a regular dose of medication. And you go, oh, I'm actually finishing these projects. I'm actually doing this stuff. I just worry about the dangers. I've definitely seen people hooked on Ritalin who will take the short-acting stuff that you can get hold of, non-prescription, and then they will be tired after like 2 hours. And then they'll be taking another one. And you sort of watch them and you think, dude, don't do that. That's not going to help. But from my own personal experience, and I guess that's really what this is about, I am currently being reassessed because I want to be put on long acting, which is 37 milligrams, should last about 8 hours. You take one in the morning and it sort of drips slowly into your system over the day. It was a recent thing, Ritalin, for me. I mean, months ago, I think, really was the first time. And it was a trial. First of all, I took one full 10 milligram tablet. And this is probably interesting because I do change up the way that I do this stuff. So I would take the 10 milligrams. I think what that does is if you sit down to a task, like I'm going to type this thing or I'm going to do this thing or I'm going to whatever, for me personally, my reaction is I just get that task done. But I can get kind of irritable if somebody disturbs me. You know, I don't say it because I'm a really polite guy, but I'm in my head, I'm like, please go away, please go away, please go away. You know, but if I take 5 milligrams and I break it in half, I can do something like, say, clean my whole apartment and be quite social and just get lots done, but less cognitively focused tasks.
Okay, so it is now 12:17 in the afternoon. This is about 3.5 hours after I took the methylphenidate. Now, this is slow release, or I guess sustained release Ritalin, so it should really actually still be at full strength now and working throughout the day. Thus far, as I said, I've had one large cup of coffee and one reasonably sized cup of tea and the methylphenidate, and that's it. I had some omega-3 fatty acids and vitamin D3 and a multivitamin, but nothing else that should be overtly cognitive in its effects. So far, it's been a good day, a sharp day. It's like I've been feeling alert. I haven't felt the same motivational boost as I do with some other nootropics necessarily, but as far as the alertness and ability to mentally perform, absolutely a satisfied customer so far. I've been told to keep heavily hydrated throughout the day, so I'm going to be doing that. Probably grab a water or another tea sometime soon here. And yeah, going to kind of keep my head down and just do a bunch of work and see what effects I notice. The one other weird physical effect, this happened maybe about an hour ago, is I actually started getting a little bit of a runny nose. Definitely not the kind of runny nose you get when you're sick, when you're snurfing or something, but like I had a little bit of liquidy snot out of one nostril. It was just like, whoa, hey, there's a little bit of snot there. So it's very much like my sinuses cleared or something as a result of this. I don't know that this is necessarily something to do with the methylphenidate, but on the other hand, I'm hard-pressed to think it isn't, just because in that first half hour, I'd feel some weird pressures within my head, and I haven't had a runny nose in I don't know how long, and seems too much to be coincidence. Yeah, everything else is good, though. My heart isn't racing, nothing like that. Haven't done any workout yet today, but that's the check-in from almost 4 hours in now, so we'll continue and see how it goes. All right, so looking at more notes that I wrote down over the course of the afternoon, I was in a pretty loud environment, so I just wrote these down to come back to them later, but at 12:51, I said, feeling a little overstimulated, I'm trying to burn off energy by multitasking. And I elaborated on this a little at 1:14. I said, I feel like I want to drive fast, but I'm not sure where the gasoline throttle is. And that kind of overall is the best way that I could come up with summing up the experience. It really did give me a lot of buzz of energy and wanting to do something, but it was weird. It was like I couldn't find a way of directing where I wanted that energy to go in a way that was rewarding and kind of felt like I was doing the right thing with it. However, I did at 3:08 say that I'm very, very much enjoying some driving electronica music right now. And that's true. And I'll even put a link up to the electronica that I was listening to in the show notes. At 3:40 in the afternoon, I had my first real food, a double handful of almonds. Figured almonds are good brain food and kind of fit the bill for what my Speak and Spell friend had recommended.
Keep it lean and low glycemic index. Don't eat anything too carby for at least an hour. And when you do, don't eat a lot.
Yeah.
But I want to tell you anyway. Keep it lean and like low glycemic index. And that combination, if you maintain throughout the day and continually hydrate, the shit goes all day long. It's like incredible.
But now let's diverge from my experience a little into the historical record of famed mathematician Paul Erdos. We actually referenced this guy once on a previous episode of Smart Drug Smarts, but as this is a methylphenidate episode, I wanted to retread the same territory. It seemed very appropriate. So this is lifted straight from a book called Daily Rituals: How Artists Work. Paul Erdos was born in 1913 and died in 1996. He was one of the most brilliant and prolific mathematicians of the 20th century. He was also a true eccentric, a mathematical monk who lived out of a pair of suitcases, dressed in tattered suits, and gave away almost all the money that he ever earned, keeping just enough to sustain his meager lifestyle. He was a hopeless bachelor who was extremely devoted to his mother and never learned to cook or even boil his own water. but he was a fanatic workaholic who routinely put in 19-hour days, sleeping only a few hours a night. Erdos liked to work in short, intense collaborations with other mathematicians, and he crisscrossed the globe seeking fresh talent, often camping out in colleagues' homes while they worked on a problem together. One such colleague remembered an Erdos visit in the 1970s, saying, "He only needed 3 hours of sleep. He'd get up early and write letters, mathematical letters. He'd sleep downstairs. The first time he stayed, the clock was set wrong. It said 7 o'clock, but it was really 4:30 a.m. He thought we should be up working, so he turned on the TV full blast. Later, when he knew me better, he'd come up at some early hour and tap on the bedroom door. 'Ralph, do you exist?' His pace was grueling. He'd want to work from 8 a.m. until 1:30 a.m. Sure, we'd break for short meals, but we'd write on napkins and talk math the whole time. He'd stay a week or two, and you'd collapse at the end." Erdos owed his phenomenal stamina to amphetamines. He took 10 to 20 milligrams of Benzedrine or Ritalin daily. Worried about his drug use, a friend once bet Erdos that he wouldn't be able to give up amphetamines for a month. Erdos took the bet and succeeded in going cold turkey for 30 days. When he came to collect the money, he told his friend, "You showed me I'm not an addict, but I didn't get any work done. I'd get up in the morning and stare at a blank piece of paper. I'd have no ideas, just like an ordinary person. You've set mathematics back a month." After the bet, Erdos promptly returned to his amphetamine habit, which he supplemented with shots of strong espresso and caffeine tablets. A mathematician, he liked to say, is a machine for turning coffee into theorems. And then there are those who use methylphenidate for purposes that we would probably not consider within the realm of productivity enhancing.
I had a few experiences with it. First time I tried it, I think, was at Burning Man, just walking around during the day, and was drinking at the same time. And I have to say, didn't really feel much. It was a bit of a leveler, just sort of made me feel kind of normal. Second time was much more useful, and took it when I was trying to stay awake when driving late at night. Yeah, that was a bit more strange. Felt like I was definitely awake. Felt a little bit sick, I reckon. You know, like really wide-eyed, absolutely no chance of being able to go to sleep. And didn't feel good, you know, he's sort of really tired, feel a little bit hot. Yeah, kind of like that. After that, tried it a couple of times when I've sort of been out drinking or been out late before going to work. That's when I think it's probably most useful.
It was a one-time thing. I lived in a house with 3 girls, and one of the girls wanted to camp out outside of the movie to catch Daniel Radcliffe for the Harry Potter premiere. So she wanted to camp outside overnight, and then me and the other girl that we were living with were like, "No, you can't do that. We'll go with you." And this girl that lived with me had Ritalin and was like, "Let's just take it, and we'll just stay up all night, and then we can like not get killed." So that was our solution to camping out in the street. But yeah, I mean, it was fine. We took it kind of late at night. Like, we didn't really get there until about 11 or 12, and I think we took it about 1. And then I just kind of stayed up all night, just talked to people, was really quite chatty and like friendly. And yeah, we just managed to stay awake till about 7, something like that. But I think with things like that and other kind of uppers, I always sort of feel really leveled out. And I think that's because I probably have some sort of ADHD or some sort of problem. So drugs like that actually sort of make me connect with like my brain and make me work hard. So sometimes I would like to think that there's sort of an alternative option, even if that was medicating myself. But then sometimes I don't really believe it. And then sometimes I'm like, it's probably nonsense.
So later on in my own day, Rhiannon checked in with me and we had a text conversation. This was at 6:34, and she asked how I was doing on the Ritalin, and I said, "It definitely works. I've got a ton to say about it, but it's going to sound esoteric and a little bit weird. I felt overpowered, like I'm a scooter running a jet engine that it doesn't need, and the vibrations are keeping me from scooting as smoothly as I would. It might just be too large a dose for me." Rhiannon, who I wish I could get to voice her own recording on this podcast, but she's a little bit microphone shy. She said, "Good analogy. I'm not a fan of anything in that family. I just get sweaty and jittery." And I said, I wouldn't quite describe it as the jitters, though. It's funny. I haven't been anxious, no racing heart, just like I couldn't find a big enough outlet for a bunch of added oomph. Now, I kept working probably until about 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night before I actually had a dinner that was my first big significant meal and actually did have the effect of significantly mellowing sort of the overt effects that I could feel from the Ritalin. But overall, my feeling on the whole day was kind of that it's a powerful drug. I probably had a bigger dose than I really needed. And possibly that using the mindset that it put me in might be something that I could conceivably get better at with practice. Throughout the day, I was sort of trying to figure out ways of verbally describing a perceptual experience without any hard and fast metrics to it. But earlier in the day, I was thinking, well, I feel energized but not motivated. But really, by the end of the day, I kind of realized that wasn't the right way to characterize it. I did feel motivated. What I didn't feel so much was a sense of reward from behaviors. I didn't feel that the use of this extra energy, of this extra focus, was giving me any sort of endorphin rush or biochemical pat on the head for actually using the extra energy. And that was unusual to me. That was a little bit different from a lot of the smart drugs that I'm used to, that I feel like provide a twinge of mood enhancement, sort of I don't want to say euphoria because that's too strong of a term, but a sense of reward from using the extra cognitive boost and the motivational boost that you might feel.
Smart Drug Smarts.
So for a final pro and con analysis on people using methylphenidate for performance enhancement, I'm going to cite some writing by John Harris, who is the Lord Alliance Professor of Bioethics and Director at the Institute for Science, Ethics and Innovation at the University of Manchester. He writes, methylphenidate and several other so-called chemical cognitive enhancers have been shown to significantly improve cognitive functioning and improve safe in clinical contexts. Safe always means safe enough, and since no drugs are free of side effects, that always means that the consumer has judged the risks of adverse effects worth taking, given the probable benefits. Methylphenidate has been judged safe enough to be widely used in children and young people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder over a long period. Since that disorder is usually not life-threatening and the beneficial therapeutic effects largely depend on the same properties that make the drug an enhancing intervention, those same benefits will also justify its use from the safety perspective in healthy adults who presumably value those effects as much as those do with ADHD. However, Anjan Chatterjee, a professor of the Department of Neurology and the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience at the University of Pennsylvania, disagrees. He writes, the most obvious reason to object to using methylphenidate for healthy enhancement is that the cognitive benefits are minimal and the medical risks are not. In the United States, the Food and Drug Administration gave methylphenidate a black box, the most alarming of possible warnings because of its high potential for abuse and dependence and its risks of sudden death and serious cardiovascular adverse events. Furthermore, the incidence of serious cardiac arrhythmias is likely to be higher in older people with incipient cardiovascular disease, one group that is likely to use the drug to enhance performance. Non-physicians calling for responsible use of methylphenidate by healthy people underappreciate this risk. Besides medical side effects, there are also possible cognitive trade-offs. For example, greater focus from long-term use of methylphenidate could plausibly produce a loss in creativity, which generally requires a loosening of mental boundaries. Such trade-offs are rarely considered or investigated. Now here's me editorializing. I actually think a lot about those potential trade-offs. So they are considered, but investigation is another question. I do feel like there is a real teeter-totter sort of situation between focus and creativity, and that's one reason why there really is no one-size-fits-all cognitive wonder drug. So to sum things up, looking back on it now from a couple of days later, is methylphenidate something that I will go back to the bottle on again? I've got this one more pill that I'm sure will get used sooner or later. Once that's gone, is it something that I will try to restock up on? I don't know. It'll really probably depend on how I feel the second time that I use the stuff. I really did have the strong sense that it was probably too high of a initial dose for me. The feeling in my head when I first took it, the first half hour, 45 minutes of feeling my sinuses clear, it was a pretty overt feeling of, something's going on here that is causing pressure differentials inside my skull, and it gave me a little bit of pause. The feeling of invigoration was definitely there. I can see why people do use it as a stay-awake drug, although honestly that seems like kind of a killing a fly with a sledgehammer type usage of this particular chemical. But yeah, overall, if I had to characterize what was most interesting to me about the experience, is I'd say that the sensation of intensity without an emotional reward was something that was a little bit unique to me in my experience with smart drugs. And I guess not surprisingly, I like a little bit of emotional reward. If something can have a twinge of mood benefits to go along with it, so much the better. So yeah, that's that. That's my thoughts. I would love to hear other people's feedback if you have methylphenidate experience, either as a single time, couple of times user or as a long-term user, because I'm sure that those might be very different experiences once you've built up a partial tolerance, built up an understanding of how the drug makes one want to behave and the best ways to take advantage of that. And of course, one of the things that we've heard before is that the ways that ADHD drugs affect the brains of people that are on the ADHD spectrum versus those that aren't can really be very different. So somebody with a legitimate prescription would probably have a different reaction than I did. I don't think I'm probably ADHD, although I've never been tested for it. But yeah, that's that. That's the self-experiment. So hope you enjoyed this little bit of a diversion, but let's jump ahead to the ruthless listener retention gimmick.
Smart Drug Smarts. Ruthless listener retention gimmick.
So the origin of the eye and the complexity of eyes, both in humans and other animals, has been something that has fascinated people for a long, long, long time. Charles Darwin wrote in The Origin of Species that the evolution of the eye by natural selection at first glance seemed absurd in the highest possible degree. But he then went on to explain that, despite the difficulty in imagining it, it was actually perfectly feasible. If numerous gradations from a simple and imperfect eye to one complex and perfect can be shown to exist, each grade being useful to its possessor, as is certainly the case, if further the eye ever varies and the variations can be inherited, as is likewise certainly the case, and if such variations should be useful to any animal under changing conditions of life, then the difficulty of believing that a perfect and complex eye could be formed by natural selection, though insuperable by our imagination, should not be considered as subversive of the theory. Now, I said earlier that eyes seem to have evolved separately on several different branches of the tree of life. I should characterize that further because it really depends on where you start defining what an eye is or isn't. A lot of the genetic machinery that's employed in the development of eyes is common to all eyed organisms, which suggests that there might be a common ancestor, even if that ancestor lacked a dedicated optical organ. However, scientists have just found a single-celled organism that the cell itself, in addition to doing everything else that it must do as a single-cellular organism, has a part of it that basically functions as an eye. This little creature called a warnoweed has as parts of it organelles akin to the lens, cornea, and retina of an eye. It is microscopic, it lives in seawater off the coasts of Canada and Japan, and researchers first found these things more than a century ago, but studying them has proved difficult because basically the creature rapidly disintegrates once you take it out of seawater. Greg Gavalis at the University of British Columbia found a way of studying this creature, though, by trapping it in plastic resin and then taking 3D modeling photos of it under an electron microscope. And what he discovered was essentially this microscopic eye staring back at him. Basically, the single-cellular creature seems to have repurposed its internal organelles to form lens, cornea, retina, etc. The cornea, for example, was made out of mitochondria. The mitochondria interlocked to form a sheet-like layer around the lens, which curved to concentrate incoming light on the organelles that served as a retina. Now, the retina was made up of something called plastids, which are structures normally involved in photosynthesis. The research team extracted genetic material and found that the warnoweed is rich in algal DNA from algae. So they suspect that at some point during this thing's evolution, a warnoweed ancestor gobbled up some algae and basically made off with its photosynthetic equipment and sort of repurposed it. It's not clear how the warnoweeds use their eye, but the authors of the study believe that they are used to hunt. Now, the vision that they would get from this admittedly fairly rudimentary eye is nothing like what a higher animal would see with its eyes, but probably more of an on-off flickering when something that the warnoweed might be interested in eating is passing near it. Although this is the first time that a single cellular animal has been found to have an eye, the team doesn't necessarily think this is an isolated incident. Most of the diversity of life on this planet, they say, is under-observed.
Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast so smart, we have smart in our title. Twice.
Okay, you heard it. That is the entire episode number 88. A self-experiment for all you lovers of mad science and human guinea pigs and things like that. Next week's episode is going to be probably equally bizarre. Although it doesn't deal with any sort of pharmaceutical, it does have a self-experiment component to it, which is pretty much just coincidence. It's not like I was trying to do a bunch of experiment episodes all at once, but anyway, this will become clear. The show notes for this episode will be online at smartdrugsmarts.com, including the links to everything that I talked about here. As usual, if you enjoyed things and you wanted to spread the word about Smart Drug Smarts on your favorite social media channels, we'd be super, super happy about that. Tweeting, Facebook, whatever you like best. I will be back at you next week, same time, same podcast, and with the same unflagging commitment to helping you fine-tune the performance of your own brain. As always, have a great week and stay smart.
You've been listening to the Smart Drug Smarts podcast. Visit us online at www.smartdrugsmarts.com and subscribe to our mailing list to keep your neurons buzzing with the latest in brain optimization. Smart Drug Smarts should be listened to for entertainment purposes only, although some guests on the show are medical doctors, most are not, and the host is just some random guy. Nothing you hear on this podcast or read at smartdrugsmarts.com should be considered medical advice. Consult your doctor and use some damn common sense before doing anything you think might have a lasting impact on your brain.